seldom happens with the kind of mirror image detail of this week's anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Beginning tonight in his Eyewitness News Extra, Alex DeMetrick takes us back to Gettysburg, 1863.
Deborah, it's as if time hiccuped, and for a few moments we had a clear view of the past. That view is of Gettysburg, 65 years ago, when the fate of America as a nation rested at the crossroads of a Pennsylvania town. 125 years ago this week, history came marching into the little farm town of Gettysburg. $75,000 Confederate troops under the command of Robert E. Lee were marching north, heading toward Pennsylvania's capital, Harrisburg, and a victory the South hoped would bring England to their cause and force the North to sue for peace. But 84,000 Union troops were also on the move, traveling roughly parallel to the Confederates, when a detachment of Union cavalry had the bad luck to run into a maelstrom of rebel fire. What began as a skirmish grew into a three-day battle, the bloodiest ever fought on American soil. 125 years later, it is fought again. This time, there is no hot lead flying at the center, although the roar of war is all around.
Mass confusion. The officers will lose control because there's no way to communicate with the troops.
You've got officers that are screaming commands, trying to scream over top of men being hit and men screaming and yelling in the confusion.
You have the guns going off, you can't hear the commands. Pandemonium.
Only there is no real fighting. It is all a reenactment, the largest ever staged in the U.S. Nearly 8,000 Yankee and rebel troops who do more than just play act. They have signed up for the Civil War and Gettysburg.
I don't know how I got involved with the 5th Texas. I was down on business down in Texas, and some of my buddies were joining up, and I joined up with them.
The reality stretches from the battlefield to the details of camp life, right down to the food.
Back in the 1860s in the Confederate Army, they ate just about what they could find, what they could forage off the land. Government tried to keep them in salt pork and flour, cornmeal when they could get it.
But living in the past requires payment in the present. From brass cannons to brass buttons, all the trappings of 19th century warfare come out of the 20th century pockets of its soldiers. Bayonet! A personal investment that can cost thousands of dollars per man, for no other reason than to pass on a moment of truth.
Trying to teach the public something coherent about the Civil War, that it's not blown out by the old Hollywood syndrome and misnomers about the Civil War. You know, there's a lot of false information that has gone on about the Civil War, and you try to teach somebody something truthful.
I found that I learned more by living the part than I did reading it in a book.
An education literally learned a step at a time in the heat and dust that separated so many battles of the Civil War and is still marched in today.
Well, when you get out there in Frawling, when you get out there in 110-degree weather, wearing wool, and you haven't had a bath in a few days, and you've got men screaming and yelling and guns going off, well, that's when you learn the meaning of the word something wonderful.
A wonderful effort and a wonderful...
In another land. It was right here, and during America's Civil War, society as well as soldiers paid the price. Alex DeMetrick joins us for the second part of his Eyewitness News Extra, Gettysburg, 1863. Tonight we look at the women who held the country together while the Civil War tried to tear it apart.
Deborah, can you imagine how difficult that must have been? 4 years of warfare fought primarily by farmers who had to leave those farms behind, often in the care of wives who already had their hands full raising families. It's a part of Civil War history that doesn't make a lot of history, but still it came to life, the historical reenactment of Gettysburg, 1863. It takes time to give history the golden glow of romance, and the Civil War has been basking in that glow ever since Scarlett O'Hara first made eye contact with Rhett Butler.
I love it because of the romantic period of the time, the dress.
A large measure of that romance is founded on the ultimate drama of war. 125 years ago at Gettysburg, war reached a new level of bloodletting. Three days of fighting left more Americans dead on their own soil than any battle before or since. It also created a legion of widows.
Women were even married in black at that time because mourning was so prevalent. It was very difficult for a widow. Often she was left with a number of children, a large acreage. It was very hard for her to get command over the people who were working her plantation if she had a large acreage or farm, smaller farm.
For women, the thunder of war contained few high notes of glory. There were only the hard day-to-day realities of life in the 1860s, made harder still by war.
It was hard. It was very hard. And the women, they couldn't follow the men. They had to stay behind and take care of the houses and mainly keep up the home until they came home. And then sometimes they never did come home.
So many did not come home. Husbands, brothers, sons, all the dead whose memories were kept alive by women. Memories still kept alive today by women who reenact those losses in order to breathe life into history.
He died when he was just 25. He starved to death at Andersonville.
And for us to wear this makes a statement that we remember that there were women there too, and they suffered and died just like the men did.
Women also did what they could to support their soldiers at events like sanitary fairs.
Taking donations in the name of Colonel Ellsworth for the cause, the first great Union martyr. Would you like to make a small donation to the cause?
Amid all the hand-dipped candles and the sewing circles, life to the rear of the Civil War renews itself in little details like small bouquets sold before a ball.
We're selling tussy-mussies for gentlemen to buy for their sweethearts or for ladies to buy for themselves for the ball this evening. It's just sort of a little traditional favor, you know, it's a little something to look pretty and smell nice.
And in 1863, the niceties of civilization danced in sharp counterpoint to the carnage of the Civil War.
It feels very strange. I'd rather be fighting.
But the ball was also a reminder of better times before war and a promise of better times to come. And in the remembering, there is romance.
Romance, that's it. The dressing up, the long gowns, getting all fixed up. Just going back to that history and time.
History was written in American blood. It was the beginning of the Battle of Gettysburg and the beginning of the end of the Civil War. Tonight, in the final part of his Eyewitness News Extra, Gettysburg 1863, Alex DeMettrick looks at the people of the present who share a very real and sometimes literal kinship to those who fought 125 years ago.
Yes, Al, they shared a sense of respect, a sense of family is what brought many of the people to Gettysburg this past week. On one level, they came to stage a reenactment of the most crucial battle of the Civil War, but among the more than 8,000 modern-day Union and Confederate troops who came from throughout the country for the largest battle reenactment in American history, there were people who were drawn by something stronger than just a sense of history. The farm fields of Gettysburg don't look much different this June 30th than they did June 30th, 1863. But that was before the Union forces of General George Meade accidentally brushed up against the Confederate Army of General Robert E. Lee. From July 1st through the 3rd, 173,000 troops locked in a terrible death grip. There were 51,000 casualties. After 2 days of trying to rout the Union, Robert E. Lee gambled everything on one final charge.
He's going to try a frontal assault across an open field known as Pickett's Charge. And then out of those trees came 13,000 Confederates. When the Confederates reached the road there were 2 stout posts and rail fences on either side. The Union Army could reach them with their rifles and poured a terrible fire into them. They just stacked them up. The dead piled up in the road, the wounded were hiding behind the fence posts. They finally got within 75 yards of the wall, and they knew who had the chance to get in. It was just a hand-to-hand fight, beating each other to death. And out of the 13,000 men that came across this field, only about 6,000 made it back to the other side.
"125 years later, the Confederates muster again. Only this time, the troops know how it will end before it even begins. History has given the battle a choreography, and although the purpose is to reenact the fighting, for some, it is more. For some, it is a chance to relive the fight that killed family."
Just so I can really feel how my forefathers went through this, get a better understanding of how they did it.
You get a feeling for what they went through, the hot, the heat, the weapons and the smoke, the smells, the sound, the cries, and it gets to you sometimes.
It gets to Ken Johnson, a man whose Texican past includes family killed at Gettysburg.
Because it's part of my heritage, and I refuse to let it die. And I'm gonna, as long as I'm able to do this, I'm going to be here and to carry it on what my ancestors fought, bled, and died to do here today.
And so, a song for the family of Ken Johnson and for the families of 173,000 others who fought for what they believed was right 125 years ago. Tomorrow there will be no cavalry charges, no cannon volleys, no reenactment of death at point-blank range. There will only be the monuments and the quiet of Gettysburg to mark the 125th anniversary of battles fought then and still remembered today.
Sometimes it's frightening. You almost feel like you can feel the spirits rise off the battlefield as you stand there.
But the people who return to the battlefield of Gettysburg each year court those spirits. The spirits of the 150,000 who fought in the most famous battle of this country's most idealized war. For them, the reenactment is part genuine history lesson and part fantasy.
Every time you do a reenactment, it's almost like you're in a dream. The scene is like you're right there, and when the smoke clears or when the sun comes up or the mist is there, you're on the battlefield.
The dream mirrors reality. The Civil War was the first to be photographed, the first to be written about by the common foot soldier. So history buffs know exactly what he looked like and what he thought. On the battlefield this weekend, accuracy was critical, down to the last rifle, the last button, the last braid.
It's a way of getting a little closer to who they were, the nameless men who fought here. That's why I do what I do.
It's like you feel a shiver run up your back because you feel like you're the soldier back then.
In 3 carnage-filled days, Gettysburg turned the tide of the war. There were 50,000 casualties. Last weekend, the warriors fought again in a mock battle 5 miles from where the real one was fought. No more fighting allowed on hallowed ground. But this weekend, on the field itself, the mood was less gung-ho and more thoughtful. The focus not so much on how men died as how they lived and what they were like.
You see them, you look through them, you look behind them, you look beyond them to what happened in July 1863.
I had ancestors who fought here. I had ancestors who died here.
Historian Bruce Catton called Gettysburg the proving ground for everything America believes in. And as the soldiers reminded themselves this weekend, for the ideals men will die for.
Remembering the sacrifice, remembering the pain, remembering the courage,